Dr. Joel, what goes through an individual's mind when they're at that point or contemplating suicide?
That's a good question to ask. I think usually what is encompasses their mind is the whole idea of hopelessness, not having a way out, being stuck, that is really excessive, oppressive kind of sadness that overwhelms them. That's usually what we hear about. And I think of the many, many different things that you think about, I think it's that the idea that they don't have a way out, they're stuck, that's it. That this is the only way out for them, and sometimes it's not even necessarily that they want to take their own life, but it's just that they don't see any other options out of the conundrum or the problem that they're going through. I think that's some of the things that's probably one of the strongest things that they go through.
Okay, so why resort to suicide and not alternative solutions? As you were saying, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there in terms of like what you were saying about
I think
them
we
not
ask the
seeing
question
another.
again.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask the question again?
Yeah. So talking about not seeing another way out, why do they resort to suicide and not seek alternative solutions?
Yeah, I think it's usually not that they haven't. They probably have. In more cases than not, they would have tried different strategies, avenues, resources. They will ask around for help. They would have reached out to friends and family members, for example, or anyone who have any resources that could be assistance to them. And I think more often than not, suicide isn't something that people take very lightly. It's something that they take as usually a last resort. Now, there are instances where people can consider it or contemplate it or actually even do it as a snap decision kind of thing. But that's typically not the most common way, right? A lot of times when it's suicidal, there is a plan involved, there is a date schedule and all that kind of good stuff, right, before they actually go ahead and do it, right? So it's not something that they take lightly. It's something that they take because they don't see any other way out of it.
I wasn't aware that actually for a lot of people it's sort of planned and scheduled in almost. Is that because they're trying to sort of make it less sort of painful or messy for the family and everybody else, do you think? Or
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes they do it in a way where, even in some of the suicide notes that we read about, and the suicide research is a big thing in the world, right? The notes sometimes do say things like, I've done it in a certain way so that, my friends and family members are protected and things like that. But I think one reason why it's planned out in such a way is because people want to make sure that, like I said, it's not something that it's a snap decision. It's something that's quite drawn out, and this is not something that I think about it today, I'm going to do it tomorrow kind of thing, typically speaking. I think about it, and then eventually a plan built in their mind or forms in their head, right? Another thing that could happen is that potentially they've had multiple attempts before. So that means, they've tried it once and maybe it didn't succeed. And then say, okay, I'm going to try a different way. And then from there, that naturally that plan builds and builds and builds.
Do you think sometimes that when you're thinking about something over and over again, that becomes your only possible solution and stops you actually seeing other points of solution? Like if you're planning for something as well, JD as well, we're planning for something. All our focus is just on that thing, right?
Yeah. With it, right?
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And that's why a lot of times when people are who think that they're suicidal, who feel they're suicidal, it's not a bad idea to seek a therapist and work with a therapist because it gives you that, like exactly what I just said, that outside third person perspective that you may not have because you're just so consumed by the ideas and thoughts that you have in head. And at the very least, it gives you a bit of clarity. It gives you a bit of a different perspective to consider and to think about before anything actually happens.
Well, what's the role of popular media in this? Because you always hear about people committing suicide, and you watch in some movie and whatever. Does that click in for some people and say, hey, that's my out?
Yeah. So the most recent examples would be that show on Netflix, I think 30 Reasons Why, for example. And not, I mean, don't get me wrong though, for me, from a professional perspective, I think as long as there is, the popular media can be used in a way where it creates conversation, people start talking about it, discussing it, understanding it better, I think it's great, right? But you cannot deny the fact that when it's consumed as is and there's no other perspectives around it, that means, for example, if I have my daughter watches it and that's the only perspective on suicide that she sees, then it's concerning because then she forms her own ideas and it's just very fixated ideas on what suicide can be. And you can't deny that show in some way or form does, I won't say glamorizes suicide, but it does pay a lot of attention to suicide. And for someone, let's say, for example, who doesn't have the attention, who lacks attention, they could look at it as one possible way of getting attention, which is scary, like, if you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
So that's something to consider. For
Mm.
me, I think it's great. Conversations about it, people talk about it, people are more open about the idea of suicide. But it has to be a conversation, not in a vacuum, but with other people, other perspectives. And the more people talk about it, the more people know about it, and the more lives we can save, hopefully.
Mm. So, in a situation that like we're all experiencing post-pandemic or still going through it, like, how likely is it to push sort of someone who's feeling pretty balanced towards a state of mind that perhaps is entertaining suicide?
Yeah, I think fairly, it's a high possibility, right? And we've had few clients who came in before, and we had similar stories or narratives being told to us, pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, they were able to go to work, they were able to socialize, they were able to go back to the hometowns and meet with family members, whenever they were going through a rough time for a pick-me-up and stuff like that, which is great, right? But during this lockdown, a lot of people, especially those people who live out of state, who just rent a room, they're struggling because they don't have anywhere to go, they're stuck at home. If they have housemates, okay, that makes it a bit better. But if they don't, if they're renting a place by themselves, that means that's it, they're by themselves, right?
That's their world.
Yeah, exactly, right. So you've got Zoom, you've got all these kind of contact mediums, which is great, but it still doesn't defeat actually meeting with someone physically. We talk about love languages. Some people's love language is touch, is physical intimacy, right? And when you lack that, it's actually very, very distraught, provoking, I suppose, right? And that can really push, correct. And push someone too closer to that eventual state.
I've heard from some people who've experienced suicide in their family that there were literally zero signs. I've heard from others, looking back retrospectively, there were loads of signs. So, it's from your perspective, a professional's perspective, are there early signs to look out for someone who's potentially, suicidal?
Yeah, I think there are, but I think the level of the signs that are being shown, or the level of signs that are being shown, will differ from person to person. And I think there are instances also when you look back in hindsight, you see a lot more signs than what they actually were in the first place. Because it's once you have something that's happened already, then you can look back and then cherry pick and see what fits into the whole narrative, right? But I think by and large, what happens is that the signs are going to be very subtle, because if someone is planning to do it, if you think about it, if it's something that's early on in the whole process of suicidal planning and things like that, then perhaps there would be a bit more signs, because they're trying to call for help, to cry for help, telling people that this is how desperate I feel, this is how at wit's end I feel that I need help, please help me, this is my call for help, right? But for other people who are further down that line, in that sense, they're closer to contemplating, they're quite close to doing so, their plans are coming to fruition, then it would make sense then that they're a bit more stealthy about it, a bit more subtle about it, because they want to succeed at it, right? Which is unfortunate. But I think ultimately the main signs they look out for is significant change, right? I think I mentioned this before. Whenever there's significant change in terms of this person's ability to function socially, or also occupationally, like at work or at studies, that's usually the main signs they look out for. And especially with suicide, we don't only talk about the negative, the detrimental change, right? That means they stop socializing, they stop going to work. Sometimes people who are getting closer to that final date could actually ramp up their productivity, ramp up their social functioning, because they want to connect one last time, finish
One
off
last
their...
go.
Right.
Yeah, right. That can also happen as well. So anytime there's any significant change happening, I think that's something to just, hey, what's going on? What's up? Let's just check in and see, just in case.
Because it's like Linkin Park's Chester Bennington, a new video just recently came out showing him laughing and kidding with everybody and being surrounded by friends and family. And hours later, he was gone.
Yeah. And that's not an uncommon occurrence, unfortunately.
It's a very interesting thing to be able to sort of feel so awful that your only way out is to take your life. And yet at the same time be able to integrate, connect, and laugh. And the fact those two can't be connected to sort of be, I can be both at the same time, and this is just a phase. That sort of part missing seems to be really difficult for me anyway to grasp where that missing puzzle piece has gone,
Yeah. I think one of the things that people need to remember, that the mood states that we're in, the thoughts that we have in our head, it's not like linear. It's not like black and white. It's not either or. It's not a dichotomy. It's a spectrum in that sense, right? And I'm sure you guys had it before. Maybe you're doing a birthday party or celebration or whatever it is, and it's supposed to be a happy thing, but you are happy in the moment, but deep down, nagging in the back of your head, you know you've got assignment due the next day. You got to wake up at 5 o'clock for work the next morning, and you're like, that's a bummer, right? So I think that's also something that's worth remembering, that someone who is seemingly happy right now doesn't mean they're happy perpetually. And same goes, someone who's really sad right now doesn't mean they're sad perpetually. It just means that for now they're sad. Right? And once we can accept that or remember that about the human side condition, then it gets, I wouldn't say it's easier to accept, but we can understand a bit better how situations like Chester Benningfield can occur in that sense.
Emotions are fleeting, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to sort of spot the signs or notice something, how should we approach someone? What could we say or do?
Yeah. I think the same parameters in terms of being available but not not pushy is important, right? Because the last thing we want is that they're opening up a little bit to us and then we be too aggressive in our pursuit and then they climb up after that. So that's something to consider always, right? So being available means that hey, if anything you want to talk to me or anyone, or you want to go somewhere, you want to see a therapist, let me know. We'll go together. I'll help you out as much as I can. That's the best thing we can do for them. But I'll caveat it by saying that in most other mental health disorder or mental health situations, I think that's warranted. But when suicide is in question or the possibility of suicide is there, typically my recommendation is to suspend it because the main goal here is to preserve life and limb. And when I say suspend it, meaning that you have actual tacit, legit proof that it's going to happen sooner rather than later, then I would strongly consider that we suspend that and make sure that this person is safe physically first and foremost. Because if he or she is passed on, then there's no way for us to help him or save him anymore, right? So that's what we want to try and do first and foremost.
When you say suspend, do you mean intervene?
Yeah, correct. So that means you don't play nice anymore. You take active action, right? So, like for example, in therapy, usually we hold everything that people share in confidence, right? We don't share or break confidentiality at all times. But when it comes to suicidal situations, we break that. We say, right, that's it. We want to make sure that you're safe and alive. We will suspend it, and then we will call your emergency contact person or the hospital just to make sure that you are alive and well. Right. So we do it in detriment of the therapeutic rapport, but we feel that the ethical guidelines say that preserving life is more important than the therapy in that sense.
So how for us, I mean, like, do we assume everyone who a friend tells us I'm constantly depressed, do we automatically assume that they might?
Yeah. No, I don't think so, because depression does not always equate to suicide. Although it is quite a common correlation, it's not a permanent or a definite correlation. Sometimes it can happen, sometimes it doesn't. But I think if you have a friend who is depressed, then you want to spend a bit more time with them and just hang out with them a bit more, just to check and see, engage and see. If they are suicidal, the typical suicidal occurrences, you start to see certain changes, certain speech patterns, for example, thought patterns and things like that we can pick up on. And then from there, we can gauge and see. But again, if you are ever worried, if you're ever concerned or there ever any doubts, then it's best to err on the side of caution in that sense.
So, I mean, if there was an intervention that took place, would the police get involved as well? I mean...
Yep. Typically, yes. Again, this is something I've heard. I heard before. I have no way to verify because I don't know any lawyers or legal persons to check with. But what I've heard of before. Hang on.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah.
One second. Let me run off to the other corner. Hold on.
Where are you?
I'm in Shangri-La. It's a staycation.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
This Chinaman's running around the corridors,
filming.
Dirty man.
Let me pause it first. Pause it. Yep. Jump in.
All right. So typically when the authorities are contacted, right, and this is something I've heard of before, again, I have no way to verify. But from what I've heard is that, not many people know this, but actually suicide is actually illegal in Malaysia. That means that if someone was to be reported to suicides in taking place or something's occurring, right? What will happen is that the police will get involved, of course, and then they will then try and arrest the person, right?
Arrest the person who attempted suicide.
Correct. Because it's a crime. In Malaysia, suicide is a crime, right? You can be charged with some offense. I don't know if it's civil or criminal, I'm not sure. But the reason that I heard for this was because that if the reason why this is in place is so that when it's a criminal act is occurring, right, the police can then take physical action. That means they can break into the hotel room, for example. They can physically hold the person, for example.
It goes back to your suspend thing again.
They can help to intervene, basically.
Correct. Because if I understand the story correctly, if there was no criminal act taking place, then they cannot do anything physically. They cannot like hold the person back, whatever it is.
Okay.
And that's what I heard, which to me makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's an old archaic law, I know, but if it's left over from colonial times or whatever it is, then it makes a lot of sense to me, right? But that's the reality that we live in right now. So if there is someone who's suicidal and the police are involved, then they will be arrested. They will be charged after they've received treatment, right? So there's something to bear in mind. But
the problem is that means they'll have a criminal record for having a mental condition.
Yeah, correct. So that's why ideally, if you can call the hospital, call the medical authorities first before you call the police. Police should be a last resort kind of thing, like if any way possible, right? So even with family members who have suicidal friends or family, whatever it is, right, we would actually say, bring them to the ER, bring them to A&E, for example, in the hospital, government hospitals, first and foremost. Only if you can't forcibly bring them in or you think that they are going to do it, then yes, involve the police, of course, make sure that they're safe.
Do you think that there has to be some sort of provisional change, perhaps from a sort of professional perspective, to this law to sort of at least enable them not to have a criminal record afterwards?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there have been movements towards that. I'm not sure whether it's stalled or not. I think the whole COVID thing, everything is just messy, right? But I think there should be, because these people think about suicide, commit the act of suicide, not lightly. They do it because they have so much on their minds. It's so stressful for them and they just don't know how to get out of it. They do it, they get caught, they get hospitalized, and treatment can be quite rough sometimes because you are placed in the psych ward and stuff like that. And then when you come out, it's not like there's a weight lifted off your shoulders, people love you and resources. I mean, you have all that, but then you also have the looming court date or charge against you and a criminal record against you, and that just makes things all the more horrible.
That's added stress.
Yeah,
correct, exactly. So I think definitely it needs to change, and I think we can do it in such a way where we can tweak it so that the police can still have the power that they need to save this person, but it doesn't have to be a criminal charge, hopefully.
So let me get this straight. If someone attempts suicide and then you don't call the cops first, let's just say you bring them to the hospital or whatever, but technically are the medical officers or the hospital required to call the police to say that this person did attempt suicide, and then
as long as it isn't attempted yet, as long as it's just that means there's thoughts about, correct, it's still okay. So there's no act of suicide. So and as long as that doesn't happen, then it's still okay.
So the moment someone is on a ledge, let's just say, that's a crime already. Yeah,
I think so. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I would assume that would be the case.
Right. Okay.
It's a conundrum, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's helpful, but at the same time not helpful.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, let's wish all the luck to the lobbyists out there they obviously know the points to get it right. So talking about survivors, those who've sort of attempted and been found and been healed in terms of physically, and then sort of rehabilitated, or even those who've actually had their attempts foiled, what type of support do those survivors need to ensure?
As much as they can, friendly support, familial support. If the employers are good about it, from them as well. So just to give them some time off, for example, or not even firing them. I mean, even that's great as well, right? Because I think, again, like we talked about earlier, people don't reach the state where they want to contemplate suicide lightly. It's usually not, right? It's something that's been things piling up on again and again and again, and this is a last ditch attempt kind of thing, out of getting out of the situation, of getting out of desperation. So when they come out of it, I think those problems that they encountered are still going to be there. It's not going to just vanish overnight just because you tried. And I think they need help to overcome it, because if not, then they'll be back in the same square one, and then they still start piling on again, and they might consider it again or contemplate it again.
has there any been research or any studies done about those that sort of attempted suicide multiple times, between those that sort of have attempted it, whether once or more, and kind of move past that and are in a very, very different place now to the one that they've been in, versus those who kind of are still
Might slip back
in
into
that
it.
place, are worried about slipping back, are still fighting on a day-to-day basis?
That's a good question. I don't know for a fact if research has been done on that. Again, I'm not the most updated now. I should read more, I think. But I think it's actually a pretty good question to ask. Is there a difference or not? I do know there are certain personality disorders that make someone more prone to acts of suicide. So I say act of suicide is because there's a lot more threat than action typically. So for example, people with borderline personality disorder, that could result in more threats and acts of suicide, and they use it as a means of to threaten people, in that sense, to manipulate people to get what they want. So for that one, we know there's a lot more threats and acts of it, but not so much completion, right? As opposed to people who've done it one time and and things like that. So I know there's a difference there, but in terms of the research comparing the two, I'm not super aware about it, unfortunately.
Is there, Joel? Because in some cases, right, there's like people who want to help certain people to see whether someone is being abused, for example. There's like a flow. Like I remember speaking to someone from the, I think it was the WA or something.
The protocol.
Right, there's a protocol you can ask, right? Is there some kind of flow that we, let's say just friends, general public, if someone were to say, I'm a bit depressed, is there something that we can follow step by step to see whether our friend might be on the verge?
Or being a danger to themselves,
yeah.
I know of one. I can't recall it from top of my head, right? I think there's something perhaps we can share later on. But I know there's one. But again, this one is very it's very contextual, right? Because different people, different situations. Yeah, correct. So there's something always to consider that, even though there is a protocol, I think the reason why we need to be a bit more wary is because the end result is so much more difficult, problematic potentially, not only in terms of, let's say, the person successfully does it and loses their life, but also the legal implications or ramifications, right? So we need to always keep that in balance, what's the lesser of two evils, so to speak, right? So I'm sure there is, but I think just a general rule of thumb, if you find someone who's struggling, be present and be available for them if you can, if you're able to. Because the last thing we want is that you commit yourself to helping and then you struggle yourself as well. That's something we definitely want to avoid.
Right, I see.
So if you can't, then maybe what you can do is point this person in another direction, or if you have a mutual group of friends, let more people know, so then the more people can look into this person's life and give them a hand, right, for example. Second one is to provide them with resources. This can be in terms of time, can be in terms of finances, even in terms of doing research and finding out where the best centers are closest to them, more affordable ones, for example, and things like that. That's also very helpful as well, right? And that's something that we can do for them. So that's another thing that we can do. The third one, I think, is just to, like we said earlier on, if you really think that threat is imminent, it's going to happen, there's no way, nothing else is going to stop them.
Oh, no. No. Go.
And the third thing that we can do is, like we said earlier on, when threat is imminent, it's gonna happen, and there's nothing else we can do to stop it. Before that, then call the authorities, involve them, just to make sure that we can preserve life and limb. That's always the primary directive.
But also, if you can help. But if you know that you can't go all the way, don't leave someone hanging also, I suppose.
Find someone to help.
Right?
Yeah. And again, if you're not a trained professional, you're not expected to help, right? So put them in touch with counselors, befrienders even.
I'm more worried about, if you're mentally, you're already struggling. Let's say you have your own issues, and then you speak to someone like that, then you might get pulled into it as well, right?
Potentially, and it's not uncommon.
I just wanted to touch very quickly on one thing that I know is happening with kids, a lot, and that is, on the one hand, we've got a society that doesn't really talk about suicide, but on the other hand, we have a lot of youths, and I know I heard it in school when I was younger and back at school, right? This idea of, someone threatening to kill themselves because they're broken up with a boyfriend or failed the test, and that is trivialized. So on the one hand, we've got it stigmatized and not talked about. On the other hand, we've got people sort of threatening this, but those threats are then trivialized by everybody else, and so not taken seriously. There's this sort of strange sort of situation with that happening,
Yeah,
the suicide. So
how do you deal with that?
yeah, what do you have to say about that? What do you have to say about that, Todd?
Blame the internet. I think the internet, this online content has made this topics that usually taboo topics so much more less, right? Suicide is one of them. The other one is things like self-harm, like sex, for example, that kind of thing. And the old ideas that we had about trying to keep it contained or not talking about it cannot be done anymore. Like we cannot shy away or hide away. Sorry guys. I got attacked. My kids just came out.
No worries. Okay.
All right. Sorry.
Cannot be contained anymore.
All right. Yeah. So the old ideas about it being contained or not talked about, or we don't talk about it, people won't think about it. We can't do that anymore, right? Because kids are going to find out one way or another, right? And suicide is definitely one of them. Actually, and we talked about it being spoken about in school, right? I actually heard from a friend where she was alarmed. She was a school counselor when she heard that there was a suicide club amongst the students, and this was not all students like late teens. This was like 12, 13-year-olds, right? And they were talk about suicide, contemplate suicide, plan suicide, and stuff like that, and that scares the bejeebers out of me, right? So I think as adults, as parents, as the older, more matured ones, so to speak, I think the responsibility is on us to make sure that our kids, we have conversation with kids about it. They understand the repercussions, the reasons why people do it and all that kind of things, because it's so incredibly important, right? And like we said earlier on, the more they know about it, the better informed decisions that they can make about it. And if they need help, if they need resources, they can reach out for help as well.
So do you think in the situation where, you break up with somebody and the friend goes, oh, she's just joking, she's going to kill herself if you leave her,
also drama, always drama.
Always drama, or even the kids club, it's cool to sort of like, we make this pact. Do you think it takes, it could just take one person taking it extraordinarily seriously and reporting that for people to start actually having a different kind of conversation, a more helpful kind of conversation where we're taking this seriously? You have a suicide pact at school as a club, right? Okay, all of you into therapy right now. Let's deal with
it.
It
means systemically things need to change, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think if it needs that to happen, then it needs that to happen. At least then from there, what will happen then is that the conversations start occurring. People start realizing that these are things we don't joke about. These are things that we cannot make light of or make the club over in that sense, right? And then from there, like JD said, systemic change throughout the school, community at large, in that sense. Right? We should not be so afraid about talking about suicide because it's something that does happen, can happen, and we can prevent it if possible.
What's your advice to someone who's severely depressed, who's thinking about suicide?
Yeah, I think someone once mentioned this line to me before. Suicide is a permanent solution to a very sometimes impermanent problem, right? I think there are a lot of situations in life where we go through where it can seem very bleak and it's hopeless and we've got nothing else we can reach out to help for. But many times in life, it's a for now thing, it's this chapter of my life kind of thing, and there could be other possibilities in the future. So for someone who's struggling, I'd encourage you strongly, please reach out for help. Loved ones, family members, and if you don't have any of those that you can reach out to, there are other people out there waiting and ready to help, right? Befrienders is a great place, Lifeline is a great place, Dalian Law as well. Reach out for help, speak to someone, and I think the more you are in contact with people, that you reach people, the more help can be given, right? The more you can change your perspectives, the more things that you can do about it to try and improve the situation. There's always something else we can try, so don't give up.